What I just done read.
Oh! Hello! Sorry, you've caught me just lighting my carrot candles in preparation for the seance. That is why you're here, isn't it? No? Oh. Well, then I guess you must be here to find out what it is that I have just done read. Hello, everyone. Or should I say, welcome, boils and ghouls and long-legged beasties of all description. As I said, this is what I just unread. This is my Bohemian Book Corner. My name should be on screen somewhere now, and this is a book review show designed to give a fair airing to books of all ages, not just those currently gracing the bestsellers or the new releases lists. Such is the case with today's book, as we will be looking at The Nightside of Nature by Mrs. Catherine Crowe, first published in 1848. First off, I just wanted to say to everyone, huge apology that it's taken so long since the last sort of new episode of what I just unread. Things got a little bit insane last year, obviously with the move and everything, as I'm sure you're all aware of. Plus also, as I'm sure I'm going to say more than once, this one's a bit of a meaty tome. So yeah, that's taking a bit of time to get through. That's why it's taken so long to get this one out. I'm blathering. Shall we just get on? Cool. By the way, the carrot candles were... I did think I was going to be able to do this about a week and a half ago, so I was expecting it to be out for Easter. Such was not the case because, well, you know, it's bizarre how our Lord can be killed on a different day each year. Sorry. Ooh, cardamom, lovely. Right, yes, so I was going to say again, thank you to everyone who has found your way here to What I Done. This will be the first of this show on the new channel, so thank you for being here. And if you do like what we're doing here, then please do spaff it about a bit, tell your friends, and of course, all the usual, like, share, subscribe. We want the attention of your eyes, if nothing else. Okay, so before we look at the book itself, we have just what we normally do, which is our word of the day. And this one is from The Nightside of Nature, and it is vaticination. Oh, isn't that lovely? Vaticination. The word itself has a Latin root. In its current form, was first coined somewhere around the turn of the 17th century. The sources I looked up couldn't decide. It's somewhere between 1595 and about 1605. What it means basically is to prophesize. A closer translation from the Greek is singing the future, which that goes straight to my poet's heart. I think that's wonderful. I love that. That's what it means. It's like a synonym of soothsaying, that kind of thing. The word itself is still kind of in use today, but it seems to have been sort of pigeonholed into generally being used to refer to any kind of prophecy concerning the outcome either of a political or of an economic event, if you like, which for such a wonderful word is the kind of level of banality that would kill a fairy.
Oh yeah.
No, which is such a shame. So please do take it. Obviously make it your own. Find some way of using it in your own writing that's far more imaginative than how people are currently using it today. So to the book itself. Well, not to the book itself, to our bullet point biography. Catherine Anne Crowe. Born Catherine Anne Stevens, sometime around 1800. There's no definitive date of birth for Mrs. Crowe. Some sources state that she may have been born as early as 1790, but it is generally accepted that she was born around 1800 in Borough Green in Kent, in what used to be I suppose ostensibly still is the Garden of England. I'm going to have some tea and not say anything else about that. There's not much else known about her youth except for the fact that it was remarked that she was quite clearly an intelligent young woman and had an avid devotion to reading and a flair for languages as well. What we do know about her is that in 1822 she married Major John Crowe, and that the couple moved to Edinburgh, where Mrs. Crowe would spend the rest of her life. Now, this is the interesting bit when we get with regards to her marriage. So most of her literary work doesn't start until she's over 40, her first book being published in 1841. Most of the reports of her life, and including what's cited in here in this volume, which was published in 1984, or reprinted in 1984, states that her husband died around 1840, and that it was his passing that almost inspired her literary career as something to fill up the rest of her life as a widow with. More recent investigation into her life, though, has said that that might not actually be true, and are leaning more towards the hypothesis that the couple actually separated in 1838, and that Major Crowe actually went on to live a full life and didn't die himself until 1872, about 4 years before Catherine Crowe died. Why this should be and where this complete fiction about her life comes from, that's one of those things that apparently we have to look at it being a question of propriety. It was a lot more respectable for a woman in the 1840s to say that her husband had died and to live as a widow than for her to say that she and her husband had separated and were living separate lives. Ah, the wonderful, wonderful Victorians. So yeah, you decide which you think is true. As I say, there is not much known about Mrs. Crowe's life before she became a writer. What we do know is that she did at some point in her early life become a disciple of George Combe, who was a noted phrenologist, and seems to have kind of taken a lot of what he thought and his teachings to heart, including his quite vocal disdain of both the supernatural and also of organised religion in general. As I say, she was best known up until the point of this book being written. No table rapping here. As an author. And she wrote a number of sensationalist novels, if you like, that really struck to the heart of the Victorian, or certainly the mid-Victorian obsession with swindling and double dealing, all of which, again, just reinforced the truth that Catherine Crowe was a very intelligent woman with a wonderfully active imagination. And it's also been noted from her fiction work that she has a wonderful capacity for dialogue that really upped the drama of the stories that she wrote. I have a very quick short list here for you. So her first novel, Susan Hopley, or otherwise known as Circumstantial Evidence, was published in 1841 and has since been, I was going to say accused, that's not the right word at all. It's since been cited that this first novel of her, Susan Hopley, was almost a precursor to the modern detective novel. I'm not sure if Mr. Conan Doyle or if Mr. Poe would agree with that. I will need to check dates of things like Murders in the Rue Morgue and things like that to see whether or not that's just wishful thinking on the part of more modern media writers. We'll see. Anyway, but otherwise then after that we have Men and Women, or Manorial Rights, published in 1843. The Story of Lily Dawson, 1847. The Adventures of a Beauty, or Light and Darkness, in 1852. And Linny Lockwood in 1854. Don't know what it is with all these books having more than one title. I don't know if that was the thing at the time. If you do know, then please do, let me know in the comments. So, curiously enough, her first novel was published anonymously, and apparently this was the thing that publishers used to do at the time quite a bit, especially when it came to works by as yet unestablished authors. I'm not going to say specifically women, because I don't know, because I think it was both the same with both men and women. If it was an author of no real repute, there was a tendency to put work out anonymously. If the work sank like a stone, it sank like a stone, and there was no real comeback on the publisher. But also if the work did well, then that generated some mystique and mystery about who the author was and what they would do next. This is very much the case with Susan Hopley, and because of the time when it came out, there was another book that came out around the same time, and Mrs. Crowe, for some time afterwards, was believed to be the author of this other work, which is called Vestiges of Creation, which was published in 1844. And this is an interesting one. It's an interesting one that I don't know. I might put on the list, I don't know, is a book about this curious thing called evolution, published some 15 years before Darwin. At the time, Mrs. Crowe, showing a bit of a cheeky side if you like, never flat out denied authorship of the work, and it was only a few years later when it was revealed that Vestiges of Creation was actually the work of an Edinburgh publisher and historian by the name of Robert Chambers that the truth came out, if you like. But I like that. I like the fact that she never actually bothered saying, no, it wasn't me. Just, you think what you think. So her interest in the supernatural seems to have flourished after she abandoned the somewhat blinkered views of her former mentor, George Crowe, and in particular after she discovered a book by the name of Die Scheren de Provost, or The Seerest of Provost, which was published in Germany in 1829 by Dr. Justinus Kerner. Kerner was a poet, an eccentric, a MD, and also a friend of Goethe, and the book itself, The Seerest of Provost, is an account of Kerner's experiences whilst he was treating a terminally ill peasant woman by the name of Friederike Hauf in the town of Weinsberg in Germany in 1826. Hauf claimed to have supernatural powers, and Kerner's work charts his attempts to treat her and of the displays of these supernatural gifts that she showed him during the final 3 years of her life. This work so captured Mrs. Crowe's imagination that in 1845, she translated and produced an English abridged version of the work. And it's really this work that led on to her writing The Nightside of Nature. It's interesting as well that during not only Kerner, but there are several other contemporary investigators into the paranormal at the time that she cites and quotes from, and even extracts from their work as well. Many of whom were German. Who she even in her work states that she finds that the Germans have a lot more of a capacity to be broad-minded about these things than the intelligentsia of the UK in particular at the time. I'm sorry? Broad-minded Germans? With a fascination for the occult? Who'd have thunk it? But that kind of quite nicely brings us on to the book itself. So, as I tend to do, I'll give you some of the blurb. I'm sure I might have done this before, but it's been a while. So, ghosts, apparitions, haunted houses, poltergeists, prophetic dreams. The Nightside of Nature, first published in 1848, was the first sustained attempt to treat reported supernatural events in a scientific spirit, and was an instant success, remaining in print for over a century. Now this classic study of paranormal phenomena is made available for modern readers, with an informative introduction by Colin Wilson that emphasises the continuing relevance and readability of Mrs. Crowe's pioneering work. The book itself is quite fascinating, if only in its premise. How do you go about approaching the supernatural from a scientific point of view? And even more so when you're not a scientist yourself, can't really provide any demonstrable evidence, and you're also living in the late 1840s. How do you go about that? Well, this is how you go about it. So to give you a bit more of an overview of the book itself, Mrs. Crowe takes quite a holistic view, or approach, should I say, to the subject matter. And she cites several times that it's not her intent to provide definitive answers to explain the causes of ghostly manifestations, those kind of things, because they exist in a place where we can't understand them. We're given an opportunity to look through the curtain, if you like, to whatever spiritual world exists around or after our own. So, I'll tell you what. I'll let the lady speak for herself. Hold on. The truth is all I seek, and I think there is a very important truth to be deduced from the further investigation of this subject in its various relations. In short, a truth of paramount importance to all others, one which contains evidence of a fact which we are more deeply concerned than in any other, and which, if well established, brings demonstration to confirm intuition and tradition, I am very well aware of all the difficulties in the way, difficulties internal and external, many inherent to the subject itself, and others extraneous but inseparable from it, and I am very far from supposing that my book is to settle the question even with a single mind. All I hope or expect is to show that the question is not disposed of yet, either by the rationalists or the physiologists, and that it is still an open one, and all I desire is to arouse inquiry and curiosity, and that thus some mind better qualified than mine to follow out the investigation may be incited to undertake it. That's the curious thing, and that kind of occurs not even like a third of the way through the book, which is kind of interesting because there are points earlier than that, and I will touch on this a bit more in a minute, where Mrs. Crowe's own religious beliefs are a factor in this. But as I said, I'll come back onto that a bit more in a moment. But with this spirit in mind, yes, I know, she does present the various forms of haunting or manifestations that we can encounter in a very matter-of-fact way. In essence, what she's trying to do is normalise the supernatural, if you like, and to give it an opportunity to be studied by more rational minds, as she says herself. When, at the time, you need to understand a bit more about, if you don't really understand how scientific history was at the time, we were just coming out of things like the Enlightenment and things like that, where the monopoly or the privations on scientific research were being lifted, where you were able to separate the inalienable truth of religious history with scientific exploration. And so the idea of somebody trying to approach the supernatural and ghosts and things that go bump in the night to the people who are like, no, we've evolved beyond that now, no, it's science and science all the way. It was very much frowned upon and looked down upon, and efforts were made to try and silence that, which is why this works really, really well, because it doesn't allow itself to fall into the cliches of the supernatural trope, even of the day. And that's the thing, this book, it's a non-fiction book. It is written like an essay, backed up by those reports that she either researched herself, there are a lot of them, incidents that she did interviews for herself, as well as again, contemporary other investigators at the time, and also historical ones as well. Many of which were documented in the press of the day or historically. That's one of the things I will say is a bit of a shame in here, that they don't actually include reprints of those articles as additional citation. That would have been nice. They unfortunately remain as elusive as the subject matter of the book itself. I mean, obviously, if you do want to see anything more of the kind of examples that she gives, then do have a look at the shorts that I put out last Halloween and Christmas. They will be appearing on this channel eventually, but they are still currently available on the main channel if you want to go back and check those out. I do have a few other things to say. I will just very quickly touch on the product itself before I go and do my eyes, as I tend to do, and I'll come back and do my overall thoughts on whether or not it's a good book or not in a moment. Yeah, it's nice, and you can clearly see that they've tried to reproduce the original artifact. My only problem with that, again, as I tend to find with a lot of these, in doing so, we'll keep the typeface the same as it was, and there, you end up with all of this dead space around the text. And when the text is actually quite small, it's a shame that they didn't just allow themselves a little bit of license just to make that print a little bit bigger. I mean, obviously my eyesight is pretty good, but even so, that is, it is a little small. I'm sure it's very nice, but it was, again, aesthetically, thank you very much. It looks like it probably did in 1848. That is unnecessary. You could have used up some of this wasted space just to make the typeset a little bit bigger. But that's about the only downside I can say about the book. I didn't really spot anything. There's not really any typos or anything in there. There is some interesting shifts in language. So she does tend to say shoe, S-H-E-W, instead of show, which was, a colloquialism of the time. Although I always thought that was more of a colloquialism here in Norfolk, but clearly not. But otherwise, the book itself is fine. As I said, it is a meaty read, as you can tell. But yes, so before I come back to my sort of closing thoughts and all of those wonderful things, I'm going to go and stick some eyes in a book, because that's kind of what I do. And while I do that, don't turn around. It's behind you. I'll come to these in a minute. Oh, tea. It's alright. I only wear the bib when I'm not on camera. This is a fascinating read. That can't be denied, and you can probably tell from what I've said so far. As I mentioned earlier, I do admit when I first started reading it, I did find myself at a little bit at odds with Mrs. Crowe's work because of this fact that she was clearly a Victorian Christian. And that seemed to be at odds with this purely scientific approach. And then you have to think, yeah, but we're talking about spirits. And how can you not approach the concept of spirit or spiritual manifestation without allowing for the existence of a soul? And that being the case, you kind of go, okay, no, that makes sense. And the thing is, she doesn't allow her own religious convictions to overshadow the work. There are a few places where she does refer to other religions. I don't think she quite goes so far as to refer them as heathen, but there is that kind of smug superiority that comes with Victorian Catholicism, or Victorian Christianity, should I say. But she still accepts that different cultures and different religions have their own concepts of the supernatural and what the soul is and what a ghostly manifestation might be, and draws comparisons to how they are more about the similarities than the differences, which is quite interesting. And as I say, the work itself, it is an essay. This was written in, as I said, in 1848, but this doesn't feel like she's sermonising, which is something that I remember noting when I did The Nature of Gothic, which came out about 5 years after this. That one does feel like William Morris is sermonising, whereas this doesn't, which is really kind of quite nice. Unfortunately, and again, it's one of the things that might turn more modern readers off, is it is a mid-Victorian essay. So it is quite dense. She does use long and complicated words. There are... One of the things I love about that kind of period as well is you will find that there are sentences that are almost paragraphs in themselves that will twist and turn all over the place like a river before getting to their point. Which again, which is again part of the reason why it has taken me a while to get this one done, because, as I say, it's quite dense in places. But at the same time, as with any artifact, I would still recommend, if you were going to read this book, read this book. Don't hope for or look for an abridged or a more modernised version of the text, because you will lose the essence of what this is. Because again, that's the thing to remember with this book. As it says on the blurb, the first concerted effort to approach the supernatural from a scientific standpoint. Things like the Society for Psychical Research, which started in the 1870s, 1880s, most of their foundation for what they did stems from this book. I mean, I'm sure other things as well. No doubt things like Tobin's Spirit Guide, or what was the other one? Stuff like that from Ghostbusters. In some sort, shape or form, again, are references to this book, which is absolutely fascinating. With regards to some of the examples, I will say that there are some of those that... Some of them you have to take with a pinch of salt. I'm sure there were more than a few people who kind of played on Mrs. Crowe's credulity and said, "Oh, you're writing a book about ghosts. Yeah, I've had a ghostly experience. I'll come and tell you about it." Just for their kind of, moment in the spotlight, as it were. But, again, as I said, what can you do with that? There's only so much kind of evidence that you can provide for this. And she does use the innumerable examples that she gives to good effect to highlight or to provide the evidence she needs for her own hypothesis on what various manifestations or apparitions what's actually going on. And I suppose the only other thing that I do love about this is there is some really nice stuff in here. I think coincidentally, you pick up little things on stuff that was happening at the time and of life in general, even though it's not the subject matter or the focus of the work itself. But yeah, there's some lovely little things in here that Mrs. Crowe says, just about stuff in general, and she does even take the time to address directly, like people who are of a more cynical bent and of a sceptical bent, and I thought this was quite nice. I also like this as well because it's something that you can apply to a lot of other things, and I think it's something that we in this day and age could certainly take to heart. So obviously this is within context of her subject matter, but again, close your eyes and think of this in more general terms about things that we may encounter in modern life. Let's put it that way. I admit that in many instances they terminate their narration by saying that they think it must have been an illusion, because they cannot bring themselves to believe in ghosts. Not infrequently adding that they wish to think so, since to think otherwise would make them uncomfortable. I confess, however, that this seems to me a very unwise as well as a very unsafe way of treating the matter. Believing the appearance to be an illusion because they cannot bring themselves to believe in ghosts simply amounts to saying, I don't believe because I don't believe, and is an argument of no effect, except to invalidate their capacity for judging the question at all. But the second reason for not believing, namely that they do not wish to do so, has not only the same disadvantage, but is liable to much more serious objections. For is it not our duty to ascertain the truth in an affair that concerns every soul of us so deeply, and to shrink from looking at it, lest it should disclose something we do not like, is an expedient as childish as it is desperate. So from all of this, do I think you should read this book? Yes, absolutely. If you have any serious interest either in the supernatural, in the Gothic, certainly in Victorian history and the kind of things that they found interesting or the things that they were scared of, then read this book. It's absolutely wonderful, and it is definitely worth slogging your way through some, at times, difficult Victorian syntax and grammar. Ironically enough, I think considering that the whole point of this book is that it's supposed to approach the supernatural from a non-sensationalist aspect, one of the things I do love about this book, and it does actually is part of the reason why I've given it the high rating that I have for its content, is this is an encyclopedia of ideas. There are so many instances, so many interesting occurrences that she cites in this, that there are at least half a dozen that I've gone, I can use that. That's the nucleus of a story idea there. So the fact that something that is designed to make something that is generally treated as superficial, as serious, then gets translated into an art form, hopefully, one day if I ever get time, again, there's a certain poetry in that, which I really like. And on that score, I do wonder if Mrs. Crowe would approve of me mining her work for ideas. And if she could cross back across that most final of veils, would she give me her blessing? Let's turn to our I ratings. And for this one, not surprisingly, for the content itself, The Nightside of Nature gets the most biggest of eyes that I have. And I've gone for the third eye, for the middle eye, for the actual product. As I say, they could have made a few cosmetic changes to make it a bit easier for the reader, but yeah, definitely give this one a look. Happy to have finally got through it so that I can bring you this. And of course, we can take it off the list, as this was one of the books that was on the original list. So, where are we? There we go. The Nightside of Nature is here. And now it is as ephemeral as its subject matter. So, last thing we need to do is turn to what I'm going to do next. Now, I haven't started reading the next book, and I must admit, this is me simply being a little bit of a grump, and being a bit of an old man, I'm afraid. Because the next book I don't have, although I do have. That's because I'm going to be dipping my toe into ebooks. Now, don't get me wrong. Ostensibly, I have nothing against ebooks. You know, whatever gets people reading, I'm all for that. It's just me personally, as you can probably tell from this show, I'm a lover of the artifact of a book as well as it's what it contains. So I don't particularly enjoy reading ebooks. But this one came along and I can't really deny it. I was going to do a different one, but I got this one for free from the author because he's somebody that I follow on Patreon. And so it would be a bit childish of me not to take advantage of the gift when provided. So the next book I'm going to be looking at is called Redemption. This was published in 2012 and was the seminal work by one Will Jordan. And if you don't know who Will Jordan is, this might give you a clue.
Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Yes, I will be reviewing a work by the drinker himself, so maybe I have to trade up on the tea for next time, we will see. Redemption is the first of his Ryan Drake stories, and that will be what I'm doing next. So, as always, as I've been saying at the moment, as the world is getting even more darker by the day, don't forget, when you walk out on the street, or increasingly even in your own home, be seeing you. A study of the supernatural from a scientific.
Science?
It's science! It's
You
science!
wanted me with science!
Yes!